Anne had the assurance, the firm belief, that the coming of the Messiah was very near, and that she herself would be of the number of his relatives according to the flesh. Her prayer was continuous, and she constantly aimed at greater purity. It had been revealed to her that she was to bring forth a child of benediction. Joachim and Anne were childless. They lived in continued prayer and sacrifice, in mortification and continency. Anne long besought God not to separate her from Joachim, her pious husband, although he had been pleased to deprive her of children. An angel appeared to her. He hovered above her in the air. He told her to set her heart at rest, for the Lord had heard her prayer. That she should, on the following morning, go with 2 of her maidservants to the temple of Jerusalem, and there, under the Golden Gate, entering by the side of the valley of Josaphat, she should meet Joachim, who was even now on his way. I saw too the apparition of the angel to Joachim. The angel commanded him to take his offering up to the temple, promised that his prayer should be heard, and told him that he should pass under the Golden Gate. Joachim was afterward conducted by the priests to the entrance of the subterranean passage that ran under the temple and under the Golden Gate. Anne had been conducted into the subterranean passage through an entrance at the opposite end. I saw Joachim and Anne embrace each other in ecstasy. At the same moment the heavens above them opened, and I saw the joy of the Most Holy Trinity and of the angels over the conception of Mary. Both Joachim and Anne were in a supernatural state. I learned that at the moment in which they embraced and the light shone around them, the Immaculate Conception was accomplished. I was also told that Mary was conceived just as conception would have been effected were it not for the fall of man. Anne informed Joachim that the time of her delivery was at hand. I saw 3 women approaching Anne's abode. When they arrived, they went straight to her apartment. Anne embraced them and told them that her time had drawn near, and standing intoned with them a psalm, "Praise God the Lord. The seed that God gave to Abraham has ripened in me. The promise made to Sarah and the blossom of Aaron's rod are fulfilled in me." During all this time, Anne was shining with light. The room was full of glory. The women around her were amazed. They ate and drank standing, and toward midnight lay down to rest. But Anne remained up in prayer. She went and roused the women. She felt that her time was near, and she wanted them to pray with her. Again I heard them reciting a song, and now a supernatural light began to fill the chamber and to hover around Anne. The 3 women fell prostrate as if stunned. the flames streamed inward, and all at once I saw Anne receiving into her arms the shining child Mary. I saw in Anne's house the preparations for Mary's admittance into the temple. It was made the occasion of a great feast. 5 priests had assembled. They were about to perform a sacred ceremony over the child Mary, a kind of examination as to whether she was sufficiently mature in mind to be admitted to the temple. The ceremony was in itself very grave and solemn, although the faces of the aged priests were at times lit up by smiles of admiration at the expressions and answers of the little Mary, and it was frequently interrupted by the tears of Joachim and Anne. The priests now put to the child all sorts of questions relative to the discipline enforced in the temple. Then the priest threw over her face a white veil. The child was instructed upon the use of this veil, when to be raised or lowered, in eating or answering questions. In this array, Mary went to table where she sat between 2 of the priests, the third opposite to her. During the meal, the priest practiced the child in many points upon the use of the veil, asking questions and receiving her answers, and also in many other of the customary ceremonies. Mary excited their admiration by all that she did and said. During the meal and the whole of the examination, I saw angels hovering around her, directing and assisting her in all things. After the repast, she was clothed anew before the altar in the next room. The robes now put on the child were the most beautiful of all. In this festive attire, Mary was placed upon the steps before the altar. She expressed her resolution to refrain from certain foods. She said also that she would lie in the bare ground and nightly rise 3 times to pray. The other maidens rose but once. Upon hearing this, Anne and Joachim shed tears, and the aged Joachim pressed his child in his arms, saying, "Ah, my child, that is too hard. If you live so mortified a life, I, your poor old father, shall never see you again." This scene was very affecting. But the priest replied to the child that she should, like the others, rise only once during the night, and they laid down other and milder conditions for her. Finally, they said, many of the other virgins entered the temple without a dowry, or even wherewith to pay their board. On this account, and with their parents' consent, they engaged to wash the blood-besprinkled garments of the priest and the rough woolen cloths. This is very heavy work, and not accomplished without bleeding hands. But you will never be called upon for such services, since your parents are able to maintain you at the temple. But Mary quickly replied that she was ready even for this work, where she esteemed worthy to perform it. At last Mary was blessed by the priests. I saw her radiant with light. I saw Joachim, Anne, and their elder daughter busied during the night, packing and preparing for a journey. There were, besides Anne, about 6 female relatives with their children, and some men who accompanied them. Joachim guided the beast upon which the child Mary sometimes rode. The little procession was also accompanied by 2 apparitions of the prophets. As Mary hastened from the house, they pointed out to me a place in their rolls wherein it was declared that although the temple was indeed magnificent, Yet Mary contained in herself still greater magnificence. The child Mary saw those boys, but she said nothing about it. She was perfectly silent, wholly recollected in self. The journey was difficult, over mountain and valley. At Bethhoron they put up at a Levitical school. Relatives of Joachim and Anne from Nazareth had come with their daughters, and there was quite a little festival in Mary's honor. Mary rejoiced at being now so near to the temple. Joachim embraced her, weeping and saying, "I shall never see you again." During the meal, Mary went here and there. Several times she reclined by Anne's side at table, or stood behind her with her arm around her neck. On the following day, accompanied by the teacher of the Levitical school and his family, they started very early for Jerusalem. I saw the caravan that conducted Mary approaching Jerusalem. A procession was formed, with Joachim and Anne. Then came Mary, surrounded by 4 little girls in white. They reached a high wall, up which there was a flight of more than 15 steps. Mary, to the astonishment of all, mounted them without assistance. Joachim and Anne then went up with Mary to the dwelling of some of the priests. They called one of the women belonging to the temple, where she executed all sorts of work and educated little girls. The widow was so enveloped in her mantle that one could see only a little of her face. The priests and the parents delivered the child Mary over to her as her future pupil. The following day was taken up with preparations for Joachim's sacrifice and for Mary's entrance into the temple. In the inn was held a feast, at which about 100 people assisted, along with the children, among them 24 girls of different ages. They prepared garlands and wreaths for Mary and her companions, and ornamented for them 7 scepter-shaped lamps, on whose summit burned a flame. Mary, in her sky-blue dress and mantle, her neck and arms adorned with garlands, and the flower-wreathed candlestick in her hand. On either side walked 3 little maidens with similarly trimmed candlesticks. They were dressed in white, embroidered with gold, and wore bluish mantles. They were covered with garlands, even their arms were twined with flowers. Then followed the other virgins and little girls, about 20 in number, all dressed beautifully. There was something very extraordinary in Mary's appearance. At the temple, men were busy opening a large and wonderfully beautiful gate. It was the Golden Gate. The priests led the Holy Virgin up numerous steps to this gate. Mary was again questioned by the priest. And now Joachim went with the priest to offer sacrifice. When the sacrifice was kindled, Mary went with the women and children to her place of prayer in the women's porch. Anne led Mary to the steps before the altar. Mary knelt upon the steps, while Joachim and Anne, laying their hands on her head, uttered some words bearing reference to the offering of their child, which words were written down by the 2 Levites. Then one of the priests cut a lock of hair from the child's head and cast it upon a pan of live coals, after which he threw around her a brown veil. During this ceremony, the girls sang psalms, and the boys played on their musical instruments. And now the priest led the Holy Virgin up a long flight of steps in the wall that separated the sanctuary from the rest of the temple. They stood her in something like a niche from which she could see into the temple, where were ranged numbers of men who seemed to be consecrated to its service. 2 priests stood at Mary's side, and several others on the steps praying and reading aloud from rolls. Then the priests led Mary down by the hand. One of them took the light from her and the little garlands off her arms and handed them to the other girls. Mary was then led through a door into another hall, where 6 other temple virgins met them and scattered flowers before her. To them the priest delivered the child. When the singing was ended, Mary took leave of her parents. Joachim was especially affected. He took the little child up in his arms, pressed her to his heart, and said, weeping, "Remember my soul before God."